who was trained under the founder of CBT himself, around P-TECH. This therapy used to involve light exercises with dog therapy and 1 hour Shavasana session. Also, I did a 10-day Vipassana course at Sarnath. So, this is just to state that this thesis involves phenomenological methodology as well. Following formulation is by Keith Campbell in his book Body and Mind 1984 by Notre Dame Press. This formulation comes in the form of an inconsistent tetrad, where these four propositions cannot be held simultaneously together. The body is physical, the human mind is non-physical, they interact, physical and non-physical things do not interact. So when you take all these four propositions simultaneously, they cannot be held together. And this is the mind-body problem, the iteration of the problem that I have used in my thesis. Also, the thesis divides the relevant issues into three categories and the three headers, and it's not just one mind-body problem, it's mind-body problems. The three headers are the ontological question, the causal question, the question of consciousness. The pertinent sub-questions are discussed under. This is Edgar Allan Poe. I became insane with long intervals of horrible insanity. For me, this mind-body problem was a personal one because I too faced mental health issues, and the questions for me were: how can psychiatric medicines impact your perspective of reality? What is real? Those periods of insanity or the normality introduced by the psychiatric medicines? Why a feeling of grandeur in psychosis? Why the impression that I had discovered something of tremendous wisdom that no one could understand? And why couldn't I express that sense of knowing? Why couldn't I express that sense of knowing? And how does having a loving family and caring teachers help you cope with such a situation? So these are the major research questions. First, is non-intentional consciousness the fundamental substratum of reality? Is conscious experience fundamental to us in reality? What are the new empirical insights pointed to us for the sciences? Are there any commonalities in the orthodox Indian schools? Orthodox Indian schools, this terminology I have used from Max Muller as he phrases out. And can an Indian model be drawn based on these commonalities? Is there a meeting point for the discourse between philosophy and sciences? Is there a point of complementarity between them? And what are the problems in having a common platform for frequent dialogues? Also, do we need a phenomenal methodology of spiritual practices to bridge the subjective-objective gap? Because the problem with meditation techniques is that it is very subjective. So applying any objective third person scientific framework is very difficult while we analyze this inward mental experience of meditation. And also it seeks to revisit the academic deficits in Indian philosophical schools in the present context. These are the preliminary hypotheses categorized in two headers. The first header is ontological hypothesis. The thesis considers that there are two substrates of human reality, mental and physical. Both are equally real. Interaction somehow must account for the causal of the physical. Consciousness precedes experience, brain, and other physical substrates. Consciousness is transcendent and imbuing reality. Also, as I said, relevant interface with metaphysics. So these are the metaphysical hypotheses. Material explanations are possible for metaphysical concepts. Systemic sciences are a language explaining reality. And Maya must have a mechanical explanation. Excuse me. So till now, we have covered two chapters. First chapter, the context of consciousness, the contents of which are in your abstract and here as well. Second is literature review. These are the contents. Relevant literature will be pointed out as and when needed during the course of the presentation. So moving on to chapter 3, these are the contents I have listed in chapter 3. I will just briefly summarize the Indian model that the thesis supposedly had drawn by drawing the commonalities in the orthodox Indian schools. Mind-body complex is the vehicle of qualia. Qualia is the first-person subjective experience. Consciousness is not equal to mind. Mind is subtle matter obeying physical principles. Mind is distinct from the body and from the brain and makes the body its instrument. It is non-local. in the sense that it can function outside spatial-temporal restrictions. Conditioned, mind is conditioned, limited, and driven by physical principles in conjunction with the body. It receives the illuminating light of consciousness. It acts as a bridge between the subjective perception of the external and the internal world, while eluding the true nature of ultimate consciousness or the transcendental consciousness. Also, the mind has two functions. Firstly, it works as an internal receptor, a link between external sensory inputs and consciousness, the transcendental consciousness. Also, ego is a manifestation of the conditioned mind, and we are conscious of the internal states. Conditioned because of sanskar, vasana, memory, and all those. So that all goes to making the conditioning. The five Gyanendriyas work on their respective modalities, register and reflect the energy patterns emanating from the world of objects to the manas. For example, you have a sound wave coming in. So the Gyanendriyas register that. They are subtle in nature and they do not generate consciousness. This point is very important, that the Indriyas are subtle. What happens in the actual world is that there are electromagnetic waves coming to us. Now, this earlobe, that is not your Indriya. Ear canal, that is not your Indriya. Tympanic membrane, that is not your Indriya. What happens in the brain is that this the organs, inner organs in the brain, they do a Fourier transform that transforms the electromagnetic signal into the brain signal so that the brain can interpret and you can make a sense of it. So this is a very crucial insight in my opinion. Hence, we require an internal receptor to become aware of our interior states. Conscious principle Sakshi illumines the mind-body complex, making qualia conceivable, leaving intentionality untainted. Else, we would all be like Chalmers' philosophical zombies. Also, manas is not mind. This is a common mistake in academia we often see. Manas is not mind. Manas is a component of the mind, and mind is antahar. Then again, as we all know, Chitta, Buddhi, Ahankar, Manas, what I have done in this thesis is point out relevant contemporary terminology for all these things. Manas is the central processing system. Its characteristic is attention, filtering, and analysis, sankalp and vikalp. It serves as an internal sense organ as well to process the internal and external sensory inputs. Buddhi is the executive system. Ahankar is the self-referential system. And Chit is the memory that governs self-consciousness. Manas is what prompts the cognitive process. The flow of information in a perceptual process is from the mind to the stimulus rather than from stimulus to the mind or the person. So mind directs itself towards the object. So mind is the source of the content of cognition, the repository of past acts, desires, and their consequences. Because we do not act in isolation, every act that we do has consequence in the internal world, and that starts the feedback loop. Conscious mind is always laced with emotions. Mind is a perpetual state of flux and instability, trying to predict the future. And hence it is prone to cognitive bias because vasana, sanskar, and all this memory. Buddhi has the power to reflect consciousness, and it is a tool for discrimination. The ego sense is manifested via ahankar. It takes the form of I. Individual identity is its defining feature. This is the source of duality. The difference between the self and the others. The ahankar appropriates sensorily processed data and disrupts the inherent link between knowing and being. And this causes the individual to misinterpret the ego as the self. Now here comes the scope of mental training to master the indriyas, understand their nature and function. Proper management of indriyas can help us achieve cognitive excellence and perhaps alter states of consciousness. The lacunae, we will discuss the lacunae in the concluding section of the presentation. Moving on to chapter 4, understanding from contemporary Western thoughts. This is a long chapter, so what I have done is this. Approaches and issues involved. These are the three approaches: anti-materialism, materialism, and dualism. These are the problems associated with all these stances. As you can see, materialism, inverted spectrum, multiple realizability. These four are the thought arguments. This one is by Chalmers. This one is by Frank Jackson. This one is by Thomas Nagel. This is Searle, and this is again famous Chalmers. Okay. However, let me just discuss one point to elucidate the power of philosophy in a contemporary context, with interface to current sciences. This is the famous argument, Mary and the knowledge argument. This is just to illustrate the power of philosophy. This is a thought experiment which states that consider the scientist, Mary, who is studying color vision, and she investigates color vision from a black and white room via a black and white television monitor. She knows all the physicality about color vision. What will happen when Mary is released from a black and white room? Will she learn anything new? This is the famous thought experiment by Frank James, and it is published in his paper Epiphenomenal Qualia. Sorry. Moving on, naturalism. I have tried to discuss three philosophers. First is John Searle. There is a very pertinent question in consciousness studies with the multidisciplinarity of the issue. That what is the appropriate level to talk of consciousness? Well, Searle says that biology is the appropriate level to talk of consciousness. He makes a distinction between causal reducibility and ontological reducibility. Causal reducibility is dependence of two seemingly distinct set of phenomena. That is, consciousness can be accounted by the brain process, the whole identity theory debate. And also this ontological reducibility is about identity reduction. Consciousness is nothing but behavior or input-output processing. This duality between causal reducibility and ontological reducibility is hard to sustain. Why? Because he says that consciousness is not ontologically reducible to brain process, yet it can arise out of it. That is to say, we know our conscious states through the brain process as well as through our first person subjective. I know myself through my brain processes, but I cannot know my brain process. I know myself or the world through my brain process, but I do not know my brain process that, oh, this neuron is firing or this particular area of the brain is firing. I think it is an epistemic problem, but yeah, it still is a problem. Also, we have this Chinese room argument, and which talks about the problem of intentionality. How do we give meaning? Syntax itself, in itself, is not enough to imbue meaning to any conscious states. In my opinion, or as the thesis opines, Searle still has not solved, or no one has till now solved the problem of intentionality. How does intentionality arise from these brain processes? And this was very well pointed out to us by Professor Shishir Roy in our departmental lecture series on the philosophy of mind. Moving on, the classic Dennett and Chalmers debate. Dennett, in his book Consciousness Explained, he points out these four things. Color five phenomena. Color five phenomena, if you allow me, it is when the participants of an experiment are shown one red dot at the top of the screen and a green dot. Yeah. Now, the experimenter, he knows that what he has done is he has shown one dot here, and one dot here. But when that thing is shown in close succession, what the observer feels is that the dot has transitioned from here to here. And this is the color five phenomena. Also, he argues for heterophenomenology, that is to say that the subjective experience of the qualia must be analyzed from a third person's scientific point of view. He rejects the Cartesian theater, that is to say there is no homunculi sitting inside your brain. He was actually his doctoral supervisor was Gilbert Ryle. So in that context, he rejects the Cartesian theater, arguing that there is no homunculi sitting inside the brain who is watching all the subjective experience in the world. And in his multiple drafts model, he says that brain creates a story. Brain chooses a draft based on different drafts. It chooses one draft and showcases that to your conscious brain. Now, one frame, and just like a movie, you have a story going on. And he does not refute consciousness per se. He says that consciousness is nothing but the story created by your brain. In that sense, consciousness is an illusion. On the other hand, Chalmers says that consciousness cannot be reduced to brain process, and this is the hard problem. He distinguishes between the hard problem and soft problem. Soft problem pertains to access consciousness, that how do we access memory, how do brain parts access memory, or say emotion or vision, how does brain make sense of that? He says that this can be solved with better neurosciences and emerging technologies, but this, how do brain processes as a whole generate your phenomenal qualia, phenomenal consciousness, that is still the debate. And he gives this dual aspect theory, which is discussed in the thesis. Science of consciousness. Well, the sciences work with the operating definition that mind is what the brain does. One thing it does is produce consciousness. And in this sense, mind is prior to consciousness and brain is prior to mind. For me, this section is the USP of the thesis because no one has, in philosophy, I have not come across any thesis which tends to deal with this, the scientific theory section. Uh, this is the level of complexity in the brain. As you can see, we start from quantum mechanics. This is where Penrose and David Bohm and Carl Pribram, all these people were saying, and even Pauli and Carl Jung, they were saying. And what is important to note here that with the level of complexity, which each changing level, the discipline changes. So quantum mechanics level, then there is the molecular and synaptic level, and here neurochemistry and psychopharmacology work. This is the single neuron level where biophysics and neurophysiology work. This is the neural assembly, where the neurophysiology and computational neurosciences, pertinently the machine learning, artificial neural network theory, they work at this level, this and this level, neural assembly and small networks. So this is the domain of computational neuroscience and neuropsychology. Then you have transcortical network, cortex, between the two layers of the cortex, so transcortical networks. This is the domain of psychology, history, and biology. Then you have the functional Brodmann areas. Brodmann was a scientist. He defined 52 areas in the brain, and that is still being used today. So, and this is the domain of behavioristic and cognitive psychology. Now, finally, the whole composite brain with a rational mind, that is the domain of artificial intelligence, the psychology of thinking. So the first thesis, first theory that I have tried to discuss is this 40 Hertz thesis, 40 Hertz neural correlates of consciousness thesis. Now, as we know, sciences work on the principle of correlation, which faces the policy of come hoc ergo propter hoc. That is just to say, putting the cart before the horse, or saying that just because you go today to the Varanasi station, Tejas arrives. No, it does not happen that. No, this theory was given by Francis Crick, who was the Nobel laureate and given the Nobel Prize for discovering the double helix model of double helix model of DNA. He, along with Christoph Koch, developed this theory. It was the first biological theory to come out. Now he says that this 40 Hz electromagnetic oscillation in the deeper brain structure, that is the neural correlate of consciousness. The problem with this is that experience is unified. What happens in the brain is that brain has different structures. For example, a temporal lobe is considered with audition, occipital lobe, vision, this parietal lobe, delay of action. So this inner limbic system, memory and emotions, all these individual specialized areas of the brain, they do their specialized function. But when it all comes together, it is not the sum of their parts. There is an additional component added. That is what the Gestalt psychology is all about. In one word, it can be called the principle of synergy. And also, there is no consensus about neural correlates of consciousness. There is no single neural correlate of consciousness. There's a paper by David Channers on Phil Papers about the different neural correlates of consciousness, which different philosophers or scientists propose. The global workspace theory was given by Bernard Bass, and this theory came from psychology. Now, he defines consciousness, that consciousness depends on the ignition and broadcast within a global neuronal network or workspace where frontoparietal cortical regions play a central hub-like role. Now, what he says that this audience is actually the unconsciousness mechanism. In the brain, memory or the limbic system is considered with this thing, unconsciousness. In the analogy of the theater, this audience is the unconscious. What your consciousness is, just this, just the bright spotlight, selective attention. That is what you know. There are many unconscious brain processes going on, but what you know is what is that individual light. Now, here is the functional framework. This working state, this working story, this is actually the working memory. You know? And this working memory, and this is the conscious content. These are the visual stimulus, and these are the unconscious processes that go on to make the whole consciousness. This is the stage. The stage as in the analog. This is an elaborate model, and it gives us a lot of cognitive insights. Now, embodied mind Damasio. No one is an island, and this is the biggest advancement that this theory makes. Philosophers and scientists still, I think, till Damasio or Francisco Varela and other people, they used to think that humans work in isolation. Whenever they talked about the mind-body problem, they didn't talk about the world. Every person is situated in a given context. He's situated in a world where he acts. That creates a feedback loop. You act on something, people may respond. That you get feedback on that, and that also is a major component in your qualia. So this is the biggest advancement, the principle of situatedness. For him, mind is mental flow of images. Conscious mind is mind with a self. Now, how does it define the self? Self is brain maps of body's interior in brainstem, which is used to refer to other maps. Now, why does this brain make an interior map, and why does it store? Because it has to maintain homeostasis. All your levels have to be maintained on daily level. For example, your blood sugar level or your insulin level, they have to be maintained. So, what we empirically consider as self, which supposedly changes on daily basis, that is regulated by this body's interior body maps via homeostasis. So this self brings you the subjective perspective. To be fully conscious, you need a self and mind. Now, remember, this is what we said about the Ahankar in the Indian model. And in this context, West is still confusing the self with Ahankar. Integrated information theory. Consciousness is identical to the cause-effect structure of a physical substrate that specifies a maximum of irreducible integrated information. Now, the problem with any top-down theory that starts with the phenomenal subjective experience itself is that it has to introduce abstract concepts like MICR, he says, maximally irreducible cause-effect repertoire of Collier space. Now, where are these? Even in our Advait Vedanta, it has to introduce an abstract concept like Maya to explain your whole world. Without Maya, the whole Advait model fails. But with give them the concept of Maya, and they can explain anything. Now, problem is, where are these abstractions in the brain? Also, there is no insight into intentionality, and there is a not very good definition of information. He says that information is cut down of uncertainty, which is not a very good definition. Professor Sishi Troy again pointed out this brilliantly in our departmental lecture series. Also, there is no insight into cognition. This is the most famous contemporary quantum theory. Penrose says that classical physics has not been able to explain consciousness, and perhaps quantum will. It is not. It is important to remember that this is not the first theory, and earlier attempts include Pauli Jung's synchronicity thesis, Pribang-Baum theory, etc. So, orchestrated objective reduction theory has three components: Gödelian non-compatibility, quantum gravity, microtubules. Problem with this is that each of these components is debatable. Gödelian non-compatibility, it is debatable. Professor Nirmal Guha from IIT BHU, he has refuted the Cantor's diagonalization argument in his paper, and that is from where Gödel builds its inconsistent theorem. Quantum gravity, no consensus. Microtubule, Professor Anirban Bandyopadhyay in Japan has replicated this quantum process in microtubules in Japan, but again, that is still debatable. Also, there's a fantastic book by Prem Sharan Satsangi, who is an ex-IIT BHU alumnus. His book is Consciousness and the East-West Perspective, which elaborates on this or theory. So, considering the multidisciplinarity of the topic, there is a need for an integrated, unified theory of consciousness, and this is one attempt by Dr. Alok Bajpai. He is a consultant psychiatrist at Neuro Kanpur, and this is his book, Maya's Reality, and he doesn't like to name his thesis, so he calls it Maya's Reality model. This is one such attempt. So this is an integrated approach. What it says is that sense organ, they take it in the information, they do a Fourier transform, send it to specialized brain areas. Integration happens in the thalamus. That is compared with existing memory maps, and an emotional layering is done, which imbues meaning. And after that, it is sent to prefrontal cortex, the front of your area, front of your brain. And every 400 milliseconds, a conscious frame of reality is presented to your conscious brain, or let's say this prefrontal cortex. And there is a constant feedback loop between the thalamus and cortex, thalamocortical loop. And then action is relayed by the parietal lobe in the external world. We get pleasure or pain from action, which starts a feedback loop. And this is why the Buddha says that desire brings clinging, and that brings clinging, and that brings sorrow. So the same process. So this flux of 400 millisecond frame of reality, that is Maya. A comparative estimate from Pavlov to Tononi to Max Tegmark, Mathematical Structure Theories. His book is A Mathematical Universe from MIT Press. To Penrose Quantum Theory, Computation, etc. the concept of mind has become subtle in the sense that earlier we used to think that consciousness is, say, an X mental state is a Y brain state, and it is this neuron firing. Now with Pavlov, he said it is behavior. Unoni, he is saying that it is information. Max Tegmark, he is saying that it is a mathematical structure. Penrose is saying this quantum computation. So mind has this concept of mind from being a brain part, it has become subtle in this sense. Now this is also a research question. How is the mind subtle? And also the brain is the seat of consciousness. There was this debate in early psychology that our brain is the seat of consciousness. This is failed because brain is locally global and globally local. Individual parts, they do the individual function, that gets all uh, sort of unified to present you that unified sense of experience. And the integration of these individual parts is greater, of these individual process is greater than the sum of their parts. And gut brain axis, there is this wonderful research project being done by IMS, Indian Medical Sciences, BHU, on neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, etc. Earlier, it was a thought that Alzheimer's happens because with, with growing age, there is a cognitive deficit that the neural connections, they get weakened. Then they try to point it out to that, no, there are some protein and there's a deficit of that. The current research shows us that there is a gut brain. This proven research, there is no pseudoscience about it. There is a gut brain. There is a gut brain axis and microbiome in your brain. They interact with the neuron in your gut, interact with the neurons in your brain. And hence, the disembodied brain must be replaced with the embodied brain. We should now start taking whole body as the seat of consciousness. Also, the Indian model says this is self is consciousness. There is no distinction between self and consciousness. However, the West has been consistently failing because they try to make a distinction, an unsustainable distinction between the self and consciousness. Also, there are three integrated levels of consciousness: illusory, empirical, and transcendental. This is a very important insight in all these three, because this was a very potent question in psychology and psychiatry, that when you hallucinate or when you have a delusion, where does your normal self go? So it is because of the integrity or the integral approach of consciousness that all these, that hallucinating self is also yourself. When you hallucinate, you are that. In normal day, mundane, empirical, you are also that. And finally, you are also the transcendental consciousness. Also, empirical consciousness with limiting actions such as body and thinking due to Maya or Avidya is perceptual worldly consciousness personified. Next, Chit, whose supposed locus is the limbic system, defines consciousness as mental quality that includes unconscious processing, which is responsible for the illusion of duality. Also, there are very clear-cut definitions in our Indian philosophy. First, it is this Sakshi levels, which can be roughly translated to metacognition. Then there is this awareness, also known as transcendental consciousness, in which the dualities of subjectivity and objectivity, they cease to exist. One is simply aware of one's whole entirety. So, mind-body dynamics is what causes the qualia. Mind and body, they do not work in isolation. Undercurrent exists within space-time boundaries. Consciousness is fundamental. Also, evolutionary theories say that claim that DNA stores your memories, but what causes your DNA to store those memories? What motivates survival? Dopamine and reward circuit, they take us back to the level we are trying to explain. We are trying to explain the claim, then again we have moved to that level. So this whole process is a vicious circle. How can the brain, a complex material structure, develop anything non-material like consciousness if it is not already conscious? We have people like Gandhi, mothers who do not eat until their baby has been fed. And these are acts of benevolence. A professor in Austin, Texas, University of Texas, she said that healing of the shattered femur is the first sign of civilization, because the shattered femur is going to take at least 6 months. Consider in our hunter-gatherer stage, 6 months, that means the person cannot hunt. Someone needed to take care. Even with current medicine, it takes 2 years for a femur to be healed. So this is the data of benevolence. People are benevolent. Also, so Sankhya evolution model accounts for the predicament better than the Darwinian model. And this, perhaps with this extended mind debate, is also coming to the conclusion that perhaps everything is consciousness. And also, brain-oriented functionalism suffers the problem of intentionality. In Indian model, consciousness can be non-intentional, achieving which is the true goal of life. Now, what are the research implications? Consciousness can be studied from the following perspective. Research implications, psychophysical level, subjective experience can be studied from this psychophysical level, psychiatric level, computational level, multidisciplinary Indian cognitive sciences framework. There is actually a course on YouTube, 4-hour course on Indian cognitive sciences framework. Psychotherapeutic level, psycho-spiritual meditation research, power of prediction. I have put in a brief case study which we can discuss if anyone asks about why do students or children or adults between the age group of 18 to 28 become incredibly violent verbally or non-verbally, seemingly out of context. Why does that happen? We can discuss that if it comes to that. So what are the lacunae? This. How do humans build a theory of mind? If I see you sad, I know that you are sad. Every one of us has similar facial expression. If you laugh, your facial expression will be this. If you become sad, it will droop down. So by seeing you, I can know. Now there was some research about mirror neurons in 1995 with monkeys. So, but that still does not solve the problem. So how do we build a theory of mind? First pertinent question. Second, how can we definitely say that other beings on internet are not conscious? Many single-celled species, such as Tricholoplax adherens, exhibit sophisticated behavior. This is a fairly recent 2021 research by Indian person from MIT. That can be looked up online. I don't have the reference right now. Also, mushrooms communicate with one another about weather and temperature. Most basic organisms sleep. Before J.C. Bose, Jagdish Chandra Bose showed that plants exhibit life, it was thought that they are lifeless. And also, plants do mind-boggling computation in their leaves. Tononi's theory implies that internet might as well be sentient. So considering all this empirical data, how can we say that other beings are not conscious? Also, this theory still cannot solve the conservation of mass and energy. However, the thesis still acknowledges this Indian history, a history of philosophy, this book by Das Gupta, Professor Das Gupta. There is a special section dealing with this conservation of mass and energy. The thesis acknowledges that. Also, there is a brilliant paper by Paul Schweizer, who is from University of Edinburgh. His paper was in Prabuddha Bharat. But thesis is not happy with their conclusion or arguments. So this is still a pertinent question. And also, we need to map the integrated model with neurobiological perspective. This image was used by David Chalmers in his new book, Virtual Reality. The Narad and the Vishnu story that Narad asks, please show me the nature of Maya. He does this, and wherein Narad dies, get married, and all those stuff. And then he comes back, something happens, and he says, oh, I was here. So this story is given by David Chalmers. So we need to figure out Maya Vidya. What is this? The thesis believes that there must be a mechanical component to Maya. It is not that if the world is a simulation or an illusion, an elephant will come into this room and speak in Chinese. So it has to have a mechanical component. And that mechanical component needs to be figured out, taking subjectivity into account. Indian psychologists like K.R. Rao and linguistic philosophers like Professor D.N. Tiwari, they favor the Avachhed model. However, many other people like Nirmal Guha or Sajdanand Sir, they favor the Prakritivad model. Professor Sthaneshwar Timal Sinha in his book, he favors the Drishtivad model. So we need to look at these different models and see as to which model provides better insight into the current predicament. And also, this issue. Also, this is the final thing. Is the going out of the Antha-current figurative or literal? How do we make sense of space and time? There are two factions. Let's say there were two factions among scholars, prominent scholars like D.M. Datta and T.M.P. Mahadevan and Surya Narayan Shastri, who believe one of the factions believe that this is figurative. One section believes that this is literal. There is a paper by Stephen Kaplan, 1983. I have given the citation in the thesis. He acknowledges the dichotomy on this issue in the Indian academia. In my age also, as I have said, philosophers like Siddhant Mishra, Nirmal Guha, and D. N. Tripathi, there is still a bifurcation and dichotomy on this point. And also, this debate needs of the going out of the undercurrent. This needs to be addressed in the quantum mechanical framework, and I believe that can help us make sense. That can have frequent answers to this question. So with this, I conclude. Audente fortuna juvat, tibi gracias, ago tu presencia vuestra. Fortune favors the brave. Thank you for your patience. This is the thesis. It still needs a lot of copy. So I have not got many copies. However, it is one copy. Once you can have it. थोड़ा सा आवाज धीमी आ रही है हाँ पीछे का थोड़ा स्लाइड नहीं था Thank you sir for asking. Thank you sir for asking this question. I have tried to, because there was not enough time, and as you can see, the thesis is very comprehensive. So I have read individual sections from Competence, philosophy of mind, Competence. There are individual coordinate sections, and also because I have the limit of the thesis is very specific. It does not delve into epistemological issues. So I have read the relevant sections from philosophy of mind and three other handbooks that are mentioned in the literature department. Sure. Let me in the West, as I have said in the quiz, as the Indian family, it has really said that that's how they that's how he says that. So, so he defines mind as the mental flow of mental images. Now, what we call conscious mind is mind with the self. Self is this, the definition of the self. Full your fully consciousness when there is self and the mind. So he draws the distinction between self and mind. And as with most scientific draw this distinction, or they have this distinction, that mind is what the brain does, that also involves your heartbeat regulation, your pumping of blood, your homeostasis, and all that. And one of the things that it does via its brain process is produce consciousness. And in this sense, uh, as I have pointed out, in this sense, this brain is prior to mind and consciousness as well. So this is the operating definition that the scientist needs to put. Because their problem is that how do you locate a non-spatial consciousness? How do you empirically test that? That's the problem with it. It's a very genuine scientific problem. How do you test? How do you make sense of something which you cannot see? How do you run experiments on something which you cannot see? So they need to work with this operating definition. Hope that answers.
तो तुलसी रहेगा ना
नहीं नहीं